At least 19 lives are confirmed lost after a powerful 7.8 magnitude earthquake struck the southern Philippines.
Search and rescue operations continue in the aftermath of Monday's Mindanao quake, which has left at least 19 dead.
A powerful 7.8 earthquake ripped through the southern Philippines. And within seconds, ordinary morning life turned into panic. Buildings shook, walls cracked, students ran from classrooms, families rushed into the streets, power lines failed. Coastal towns were warned to move away from the water, and in General Santos City and nearby areas, the damage quickly turned deadly. At least 32 people were killed, more than 200 were injured, buildings collapsed. A landslide buried victims. A tsunami warning spread across coastal communities. And after the first massive shock, the ground kept moving again and again as aftershocks hit the region. This was not just another earthquake alert. This was one of those disasters where the damage begins in seconds, but the fear lasts for days. Because when a 7.8 earthquake strikes near a populated region, the first question is not only how bad the shaking was. The real question is this: how many people are still trapped under the damage? The earthquake struck off the southern Philippine island of Mindanao, near Sarangani and close to General Santos City. It hit early in the day when many people were already awake, moving, working, traveling, or preparing for school. That timing made the disaster even more frightening, because this was not the middle of the night when the streets were empty. This was the start of a normal day. Children were in school. Workers were inside buildings, families were in homes, businesses were opening, then the ground moved. At first, people may have felt the usual warning signs: a low rumble, a sudden shake, a light swing of hanging objects. Then it grew stronger. The floor began moving harder, walls started cracking, ceilings shook, windows rattled, and then panic took over. In earthquake zones, people are taught to stay calm. But when the ground beneath you starts moving violently, calm is not easy. The human body reacts before the mind can think. People run, people scream, people grab children, people look for exits. And in the Philippines, that panic was made worse by the scale of the quake. A 7.8 magnitude earthquake is not small. It is a major event. It carries enough force to damage buildings, trigger landslides, break roads, knock out power, and send fear across hundreds of kilometers. In General Santos City, the shaking damaged and collapsed structures. A Jollibee restaurant was reported among the damaged or collapsed buildings. A commercial complex was hit. Parts of schools and public buildings suffered serious damage. And in some areas, rescue crews had to search through rubble for people who may have been trapped. That is where an earthquake becomes more than a number, because 7.8 magnitude sounds like a measurement. But a collapsed building is where that measurement becomes human. It becomes a family waiting outside for news. It becomes rescuers listening for voices under concrete. It becomes broken glass, twisted metal, dust in the air. And people staring at a place that looked normal just minutes earlier. The death toll climbed as reports came in from different provinces. Some victims were killed by collapsing structures, others died in landslides. In Sarangani province, a landslide was reported as one of the deadliest scenes, killing multiple people after the quake shook loose the ground. This is one of the most dangerous parts of a strong earthquake in the Philippines. The country is not flat. Many communities sit near slopes, mountains, rivers, and coastal land. When a powerful quake hits, the danger does not stay inside buildings. The land itself can fail. A hillside can collapse, rocks can fall, roads can crack, soil can slide. And people who survived the shaking can still be caught by what comes next. That is why landslides after earthquakes are so deadly. They do not give people much time. A slope that looked stable yesterday can give way in seconds. And once the ground moves, homes, roads, and people can be buried before rescue crews even arrive. The earthquake also triggered tsunami warnings. For coastal communities, this added a second wave of fear. People had already felt the violent shaking. Then came the warning that the sea itself could become dangerous. In parts of the Philippines and nearby countries, people were told to move away from coastal areas and seek higher ground. This is one of the most terrifying parts of a major offshore earthquake. You do not know at first whether the danger is over. The ground stops shaking, but the sea may still be moving. Families near the coast have to make quick decisions. Do they stay? Do they leave? How far is high ground? Can they bring elderly relatives? Can they carry children? Can they move before the water arrives? Those are not easy choices. They are survival choices. Authorities later lifted the tsunami warnings after the threat had passed, but by then the fear had already spread across coastal villages. And that fear was justified. A tsunami does not need to be huge to be dangerous. Even a smaller wave can damage boats, flood low areas, pull people into the water, and destroy coastal property. For the Philippines, the memory of earthquake-triggered tsunamis is not just history. It is part of the country's disaster reality. The Philippines sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire. That means it is surrounded by active faults, trenches, volcanoes, and tectonic boundaries. Earthquakes are not rare there, but every major quake is different. Every epicenter is different. Every depth is different. Every city has different buildings, different roads, and different levels of preparation. That is why one earthquake can pass with limited damage, while another leaves entire neighborhoods broken. This quake was especially dangerous because of its strength and location. It hit near southern Mindanao, where many communities are close to the sea, close to mountains, and close to fault activity. The shaking was strong enough to be felt across wide areas. In some nearby Indonesian islands, people also moved to higher ground after tsunami warnings and small wave activity were reported. That shows how far the fear traveled. This was not only a Philippine emergency, it was a regional warning. After the first major quake, aftershocks followed, and for survivors, aftershocks can be almost as frightening as the main event, because after a big earthquake, people do not trust the ground anymore. They sit outside, they avoid damaged buildings, they listen for cracking sounds, they stare at walls, they wonder if the next shock will bring down what the first one weakened. And in this case, strong aftershocks were reported, including some powerful enough to cause more panic and possible additional damage. This is why officials warn people not to rush back into damaged buildings. A building can look standing from the outside and still be unsafe. A cracked column, a weakened wall, a damaged roof, a loose ceiling, a staircase that shifted, any of these can turn deadly during an aftershock. So when earthquake survivors return home too early, they may be walking back into a trap. That is why schools were suspended in affected areas. That is why inspections were needed. That is why emergency crews had to move carefully. Because the disaster does not end when the shaking stops. In many ways, that is when the most difficult work begins. Search and rescue teams have to find missing people, hospitals have to treat the injured, engineers have to inspect buildings. Power companies have to restore electricity, road crews have to clear debris, families have to find shelter, and local officials have to decide which areas are safe and which are still dangerous. In General Santos City, the airport was also affected, with operations disrupted and flights canceled. That matters because after a disaster, transportation becomes critical. Airports bring help, roads carry supplies, ports move goods. If transportation systems are damaged or interrupted, rescue and recovery become slower. And when people are injured, missing, or displaced, every hour matters. The images from the earthquake tell a painful story. Students outside schools, buildings cracked and broken. Rescue teams near collapsed structures, people gathered in open areas, families checking on each other, coastal residents moving away from the shoreline, dust rising from damaged buildings. And behind every image is a simple truth. Nobody starts the morning expecting the ground to betray them. That is what makes earthquakes so terrifying. With hurricanes, people may see the storm coming. With wildfires, smoke may rise in the distance. With floods, rain may fall for hours before water rises. But an earthquake gives almost no warning. 1 second life is normal. The next second the ground is moving. That suddenness is why earthquakes create so much trauma. People remember where they were. They remember the sound. They remember the shaking. They remember who they grabbed. They remember what fell. They remember the fear of not knowing whether the building would hold. And for the families who lost loved ones, the memory becomes permanent. The official death toll may still change as search operations continue. That is common after major earthquakes. At first, numbers come from hospitals, police, local officials, rescue crews, and regional reports. Then they are updated as more areas are reached. Remote communities may report damage later. Landslide areas may take longer to search. Collapsed buildings may hide victims beneath debris. So the early number is never just a statistic. It is a moving picture of a disaster still being understood. Right now, the known damage is already serious. At least 32 dead, more than 200 injured, buildings collapsed, landslides reported, tsunami warnings issued, aftershocks continuing. Schools suspended, emergency teams deployed. and entire communities left shaken. For the Philippines, this earthquake is another reminder of how vulnerable the country is to the forces beneath it. The islands are beautiful, but they sit in one of the most active disaster zones on Earth. Earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis, typhoons, floods, landslides, the country faces all of them, and every time a major disaster hits, the same question returns. Were the buildings ready? Were the schools ready? Were the coastal towns ready? Were the warning systems fast enough? Were people able to evacuate in time? These questions matter because another earthquake will come one day. Maybe not in the same place. Maybe not with the same strength. But in a country built on active ground, preparation is not optional, it is survival. Still, in the middle of all this damage, the response also shows something important. People helped each other. Teachers protected children, families searched for relatives. Rescue workers moved toward collapsed structures while others moved away. Emergency teams mobilized. Doctors and nurses treated the injured. Officials issued warnings. And communities began doing what disaster-hit communities always have to do: survive the first shock, then face the next hour, then the next day, then the long recovery, because after the cameras leave, the rebuilding begins. Homes must be repaired. Schools must reopen. Businesses must recover. Families must bury the dead. Children must feel safe again. And damaged communities must decide how to rebuild stronger than before. That is the part of an earthquake that lasts the longest. Not the shaking, the aftermath, the cleanup, the grief, the fear of aftershocks, the empty space where a building used to stand, the family member who does not come home. The sound that people replay in their minds every time a truck passes or the floor trembles. This 7.8 quake has already become one of the Philippines' most serious disasters of the year, and the full scale may not be known immediately. But one thing is already clear: southern Mindanao has been hit hard, the damage is real, the deaths are real, the injuries are real, and the danger is not fully over while aftershocks continue and damaged buildings remain unstable. Emergency crews are racing against time. Families are waiting for news. Hospitals are treating the injured. Coastal areas are recovering from the fear of a tsunami, and millions across the Philippines are once again reminded that in the ring of fire, the ground can change everything without warning. A 7.8 earthquake struck, buildings collapsed, more than 200 people were injured, at least 32 people are dead, and now the Philippines is left facing the hardest part of any disaster. Not just surviving the moment it happens, but rebuilding after the ground finally goes still.